Hey everybody, it's Joey once again from the technical account management team here at Equinix. And today I wanted to just take some time and sort of demystify one of the more commonly asked about processes within the Fabric portal, and that is that of just ordering Fabric ports themselves. And so if you're new to the platform, or maybe you've just heard terms like ECX or Equinix Cloud Exchange or Fabric thrown around, let's just do a very brief and very high level overview of what that's all referring to. So Fabric in a nutshell is Equinix's answer to the traditional software-defined interconnectivity model. And in the same way that many businesses out there are opting to be more agile and flexible by virtualizing things like routers or firewalls, what Fabric, and by extension the Fabric platform or ecosystem, offers is a way to virtualize that interconnectivity without owning that infrastructure. So I personally like to think of Fabric as a sort of superhighway, with all these on-ramps and off-ramps and all of these different metros around the world. And the Fabric ports themselves are a bit like paying for lanes on that highway. And of course, as you can imagine, those come in all sorts of flavors when we start talking about things like bandwidth or encapsulation type and so on. And so we're here at the Fabric portal homepage. And as you could probably guess, I'm going to go ahead and head over to ports and order an Equinix Fabric port. So as is the case with pretty much any and all of our self-service functions here within the Fabric portal, the first thing I'm going to see up here is just a roadmap of the steps to come, which includes things like connection details and contact and billing info. And so let's talk about this first option here, which is port details. So I have three options. I have my cage in Equinix IBX, a building meet me room or BMMR, and a third party with a cage in an Equinix IBX. So my cage in an Equinix IBX is pretty much exactly what it sounds like, and applies to likely a wide swath of the audience out there. This is for customers who already have a presence in one of our data centers, and what this workflow will ultimately result in will be that the equipment in their cage or rack will connect to a patch panel, which will in turn bring them onto the Fabric. And now once this port has been provisioned, the customer can use that as a springboard to connect their environment out to various cloud service providers or other vendors, or even stitch their own network together across metros. And for the providers and vendors themselves out there, these ports can also be bundled up into public-facing objects or profiles here within the portal to allow third parties to connect to your services. Now, this next option here, called Building Meet Me Room, is referring to a property of some of our multi-tenancy data centers. And this Building Meet Me Room is a sort of neutral ground within that space where a third party will bring in your services, and Equinix will essentially meet them at that demarcation. And again, this is not just region, but metro specific, and only really applies to a handful of locations. So I'm not going to cover this in a ton of detail because the workflow remains largely the same. And now we have this third party option here at the bottom, which is also referred to as a remote port. So we talked about how customers with a presence in a data center would select this My Cage option up here. But what about customers who don't have any physical presence with us, or simply don't see a need for physical space and power in a specific metro where they still want to extend their reach? And so what this last option entails is having a service provider bring you into one of our data centers and connecting you right into the Fabric. And so now we get to enjoy all of the benefits of the platform and still have that port or ports to interface with here in the Fabric portal without needing to have a physical footprint. Now let's start going through the workflow here as if we were ordering using this My Cage option. And then we'll circle back and cover the other two options together as they're treated more or less the same. And now first I'm going to be prompted to select a region and a location. And it's important to point out that you'll need to have a billing account associated with the country in which you're looking to provision this port. So for example, if I select Chicago here, I'm going to want to make sure that I have a US billing account. And likewise, if I were to select Toronto, for example, I would want to be sure that I had a Canadian billing account. This is just a minor call out, but it is something I think is worth mentioning so that you and your team can plan accordingly before going into this process and not wind up getting stuck or having to circle back. And so I'm going to go on and proceed with Chicago here. And this is going to be a non-shared port, though I think right now this option is not customer facing anyway. And so next, let's talk about these connection packages. So these two options here on the left, being the unlimited and standard packages, both refer to what we call EVPL, or Ethernet Virtual Private Line. And really the only difference between the two is how virtual connections get charged. So if you see yourself provisioning many virtual connections from this port, then maybe unlimited is the way to go here. However, if you only see yourself maybe creating one or two, then the standard package here is going to be perfect for you. And now lastly, there's this EPL or Ethernet private line option. So if EVPL can be thought of like that superhighway we spoke about earlier, I like to think of EPL as being a big underground tunnel where we can pass untagged traffic or multiple VLANs from point to point over a single connection. And some important things to point out here are that virtual connections built from an EPL port need to land on another EPL port, and that you need to be the owner of both of those EPL ports. So what is EPL not? EPL is not a solution for piping multiple VLANs or untagged traffic out to another vendor or cloud provider over a single connection, but it is a way to stitch your own environment together from metro to metro without having to tag that traffic or create multiple connections for each VLAN the way you would with a standard EVPL port. Now that said, let's proceed with just the standard option here. I'm just going to go with the 10 gig option while we're at it. And let's head on to service details. So now we're going to get prompted to select whether we'd like to provision a single port, a redundant pair of ports, or to create a lag port. Now, the single port option here is exactly what it sounds like. If we aren't interested in any type of redundancy and speed or budgetary concerns are the priority here, this is a perfect option. And you'll see that I'm going to get asked if I'd like to configure this port as a lag port, which implies that it could be part of a lag group or the beginning of one. I'll also get asked to select my encapsulation type, and the vast majority of the time this will be .1Q unless there's a specific need outlined for Q&Q that you've discussed with the solutions architect. And that goes for this TPID or tag protocol identifier, which is going to be this 8100 value the vast majority of the time as well. Now, while we're here, let's take a look at what ordering redundant ports looks like, which is something that we definitely encourage. And so you'll see that I have the option to create a new pair of redundant ports or to have this new port that we're creating be redundant to an existing port. And what's actually happening behind the scenes is that these ports will sit in completely different hardware planes. Now, lastly, let's take a look at this lag option here, which is just a way for us to aggregate the bandwidth of multiple ports into a single logical port for us to interface with within the portal. And now let's head back to the single port here, and we'll head on to the next section, which is connection details. Now, obviously, as this is just a demonstration, I don't have a specific cage or patch panel in mind to populate all of these fields, but this is where you'd want to have that information handy. And we can take a look at what that looks like by just selecting some random options from each of these drop-downs here, which is exactly what we're going to do, just so that we can proceed forward to the end. And now really all that's left to do is confirm that order. And that said, let's actually take a few steps back and we'll see what the process looks like for ordering a remote port and how that differs a little bit. So I'm going to select that third-party cage or remote option, and we're going to move on forward with everything the same up until connection details. And now what you'll see is that where we'd have entered our patch panel and cage information before, now we're prompted to upload an LOA from the provider that we've gone with to bring us into the data center. So this is where we'd attach that LOA from that service provider and proceed exactly how we did before. And so once the order's been completed, you'll have that remote Fabric port here to interface with in the Fabric portal, just like any other Fabric port. And on that BYOC or bring your own connection note, I'd like to also add that it's important to be sure that the provider who's piping that traffic into the Equinix data center is also tagging that traffic. And now if I were to upload an LOA of some sort here, we'd head on to billing info and review just the same as we showed previously. And with that, we've pretty much wrapped up this demonstration. I hope that this has been helpful and leaves you feeling more empowered and more confident to take on these kinds of self-service functions here in the portal. And I hope that this has shed some light onto what to expect and what to bring to the table before starting this process. And I also hope this helped highlight some of the strengths and use cases of these ports and of the platform as a whole. So until next time, again, this has been Joey from the Technical Account Management team here at Equinix, and thank you so much for watching. Take care, everybody.